We are back following our first episode with a brand new question. And our question this time, and I'll state it because I want your immediate response to it. Why are we so afraid to share our visions of the future or to dream out loud?
Oh, this one hits hard, doesn't it? I feel like everyone who immediately hears that question is probably like, "Oh, that's not me. I don't do that. No, that's for somebody else." But when you pause and you actually think about it, most of us do this. Most of us hold something to ourselves that we're excited about or that creates that little like childlike spark in our mind and we just keep it to ourselves because we think what if it's too big? What if people think I'm crazy? What if it doesn't align with their expectations of me? What are they going to think of me then? And so I think the first step in trying to understand why we're afraid or where this fear comes from is acknowledging that most of us probably are afraid on some level to share our visions for the future, to dream out loud, to be too bold or too big or whatever it might be. And I think for me, when I'm thinking of it from a neuroscience and evolutionary perspective, it makes total sense why we're afraid of this. Because on the biological level, we need people to survive. We need our tribe. We need to belong. Because if we were off on our own, the chances of survival goes down dramatically. And so and I know that seems like those two things might not go together, dreaming out loud and what does this have to do with the tribe? But the idea here is that if we dream too big, if we do something that doesn't align with people's perception of who we are, then we might be socially rejected. And if we're socially rejected, then we're not going to survive because we're not going to have that tribe to walk with, to protect us, to fill in the gaps of where our weaknesses lie. So that's kind of how I think about it of what are people going to think of me? Are they still going to accept me? Is this going to ostracize me? I think that's a big part of the piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much just to say about this one. I'll start with this, and based on even the sort of the listening concept, generative listening concept, it really talks about our listening across time, and we tend to listen and speak from automatically what is and what's been. That's like our default reference point. Like think about like, small talk at a networking conversation, a meeting or something like that, right? We recount anecdotes of our past up until maybe even that moment, like what has you here today to we tend to share stories of our, origin story professionally, personally, that kind of thing. And I would even equate it to we're drawing from our file cabinet of the familiar and then we're pulling those files out and that's kind of like where we listen and speak from by default. Now I'd be curious about your thoughts on this. My research actually points to an interesting neurological phenomenon that's happening when we do that is one would say those conversations are typical. This is how we talk with each other about what is and what's been. Yet our brain pattern when we're in those conversations, when we're encountering another person and we're in a conversation with them, our brain pattern actually lights up the same as if we're being interrogated,
Mm.
where it's just on fire trying to figure out like what's the safe bet to
Mm-hmm.
share in this moment. And so it can be really exhausting. I'm curious about just, your understanding and am I on the right page in the research I've done around that one?
Yeah, so typically when you're in those sorts of conversations, it does feel a little bit high pressure. It doesn't feel like you're talking to your best friend. You're constantly trying to predict what are they going to say? What do they expect me to say? How do I make sure I present myself as somebody who is trustworthy and safe? And so when you are trying to put up that front so that, they feel comfortable talking to you and maybe, if this relationship were to go on somewhere or if you're trying to get something out of it, You need them to feel like you are trustworthy, that you are comfortable, that you are somebody that can be trusted with a task or with information. And so while you're trying to convince this person of that through the conversation, whatever the topic is, the areas of your brain are going to light up. And in fact, of like, what's the next right thing to say? What are they going to say next? How do I respond appropriately? So you're constantly thinking, what am I going to do next? And this is predictive processing. It's a function of the brain for efficiency, for safety, for making sure that we conserve our energy and our resources, because novelty is expensive. And so even though these are the same conversations, it's small talk or whatever it might be, we are still constantly adapting and scanning for threats and trying to understand, okay, is this going to go where I think it's going to go, or is it going to take a left turn? And how am I going to respond if that happens? And so that's why the areas of your brain light up as if you're being interrogated, because you actually don't know where this conversation is going. You're trying to predict, you're trying to push it in a certain direction. Your brain is pretty sure, because you've done this a million times, but that one-off opportunity that it might not happen, we need to be prepared. So have those systems alert and awake and ready to go just in case.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost, I think about it as like how large language models work, where it's trying to predict the right next answer, unknowing the agenda maybe of the other.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some, and I find that a lot, when we enter into those conversations, again, back into the familiar territory of what is and what's been, we all walk in with some agenda of some kind. And that could be, I just want to be likable, or
Yes.
I want an advantage, or I want to sound impressive, or whatever those things may be. And so how do I do that? And then how do I predict where that conversation may go? That's incredibly exhausting, I imagine.
Oh, yes, it's absolutely exhausting. And you keep saying, in your terms, you say what was and what is. In my context, from a neuroscience perspective, it's the same thing. I always say your sensory present and your remembered past. Those are the two things that where all of our experience comes from. So we create our own experience based on those two things, our sensory present and our remembered past, our past programming. And it's exactly what you're saying with what was and what is. It's the same concept, different language to describe the same thing. But yeah, to your point, it is extremely exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally, because our brain is constantly preparing for the inevitable, for a threat. Because, like we talked about in our first episode, the brain's number one job is survival. And so, how am I constantly scanning the environment, scanning other people, subconsciously reading their body language, reading their facial language, their expressions, subconsciously picking up on the chemical signals they are sending? Are they stressed? Am I picking up on that through cortisol that they're releasing through their sweat and their saliva? And we subconsciously pick up on that. And then through emotional contagion, we take on their emotional state on some level. And also, depending on what's going on in their brain, there's something called brain synchronization, where our brain waves will literally sync up with the person that we're having a conversation with. And that's why when you spend a lot of time with your best friend, you feel like you can finish each other's sentences, because your brains are literally syncing up with each other and they're on the same plane. The same thing happens when we're just having a conversation with somebody. So not only is our brain firing as if we're being interrogated in situations like that, especially, if we're having to talk about our future goals that we already are unsure if people will accept, we are also influencing their brain and their nervous system and how they would potentially respond.
Mm. So over the last 5 years, I've been conducting live experiments with, we'll say, tens of thousands of leaders at this point. And to demonstrate the difference, what I'll do is I'll prompt them to have three conversations. We'll focus on two of them today. One is I have them pair up with somebody in the room, likely somebody they don't know, And I just tell them to have a conversation. No prompt, no direction whatsoever. And inevitably and almost exclusively, with few, maybe a handful of exceptions, the conversation will always be in that space and time of what has happened before. Could be what's happening in the room at that moment, or what led to them being in that room, or whatever it may be. And it could go personal, professional. It could be a resume. It could be a family background. How did it, all origin story, all those kinds of things. Could be about an event that took place, something they're challenged by that's going on or has gone on. And it's kind of surprising to folks to realize that, oh, well, that is a place we can go. There's many places we can go with conversations, but that's the one that we go to by default. And then what I do is I give them a prompt for the second conversation. And I have them talk specifically about their hopes, ambitions, and dreams with each other. And of course, when I introduce that prompt, it's met almost immediately with kind of like, what? And you could almost like watch a switch go off, where once the conversation gets going, it takes on a completely different personality than the first one. There's much more animation. The pace of the conversation slows. There's a lot more sort of pregnant pause and processing, body movements and even gestures. I see, people leaning into each other, just and being more patient with each other. And when I sort of poll them afterwards, I ask people, what did you notice was the difference between the two? What was distinct? And what comes up all the time is that second conversation when we were talking about hopes, ambitions, and dreams. I feel way more energy now. I'm excited about possibility. I felt more intimacy with my conversation partner. I felt like I got a glimpse of what really matters to them as a human being. Even to the point where I ask folks, like, how many of you would be willing to, or how many of you are for the future the other described? And everyone's, of course, I'm 100% for that future, which for me means that they've gained an ally in that future. And I'll ask them further, how many of you would be willing to contribute your personal time and resource to help that person make that future a reality? All hands go up, which means, you've got somebody enrolled in that future as an accomplice. They want to actually help you make it real. And so it was markedly different. And once those two different conversations take place, then people start to notice and say things like, wow, now that we had that second conversation, I realized how transactional the first conversation was. It was much more urgent, like how much information can I get out in the conversation when we were just talking from, what is and what's been. In the second conversation, it was the listening was much deeper. It was much more engaging in that. And one of the distinctions, and then when I'm kind of run this by you to see what you have to say about it, one of my takes on it is in our automatic conversations where we're talking from that place of the familiar, we're recalling, like we're drawing out of our memory banks. When we're having a conversation about hopes, ambitions, and dreams, we're generating the language typically in the moment. Meaning we don't know, we can't know what we're saying because it's unknowable. And so we're sort of making up language, which of course is coming from a different part of our brain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there. So kind of in the first conversation, what is and what was and what is, it's rehearsed. They know what they're going to say. They've said it a million times. They've already experienced it. So they're on autopilot when they're having this conversation, which is why it feels very transactional. You don't have to put much thought there. It's already neural pathways that have been ran multiple times. They're easy. They're familiar. They're efficient. It's like, that little commercial jingle in the back of your head from childhood. You remember it 50 years later and you don't know how. That's how those conversations are. They live in the filing cabinets in your brain and you can spew them off without needing much conscious engagement, which is why, it feels very transactional. Which was why when you assess their body language, they're probably a little bit separate apart because they're not having to invest many resources. They're not having to activate different areas of their brain. They're mostly running from the default mode network, which is, where a lot of autopilot lives. But when you shift them over into what are your goals, ambitions, and dreams, it's coming from a completely different place. Sure, they've probably thought about it. They've probably, engaged some daydreaming, some imagination, which also lives in the default mode network. But there's more emotion involved there. There's more passion involved there. There's more vivid imagery involved there because they haven't experienced it in the past. And so they're having to create a vision in their own mind of what that looks like. And that requires not just the default mode network, but that also requires the salience network and the central executive network. So the central executive network is like our goal-oriented behavior, our decision-making, our conscious focus, our conscious effort. The default mode network is imagination, daydreaming, our self-identity, our narrative about how we belong in the world. And the salience network is the network that helps us fluidly toggle between the default mode and the central executive. So what I would think is in that second part of the conversation where they're talking about their goals, ambitions, and dreams, they're fluidly moving between the default and the central executive network, which is where creativity lives, which is where passion lives, which is where excitement and joy lives, opposed to the first conversation where they're probably primarily operating out of the default mode network, and they're not fluidly shifting between the two. So that would be my assumption of if we were to put, brain scans on them while they're having this conversation, that's probably what's going on. And yeah, it's fascinating because while humans are very, scientific and we can study them and we can understand them, we are so the most complex beings. And when there's emotions involved and attachment theory and all of these other things and understanding why and when and how different brain networks coordinate and connect, it is just so fascinating. But at the end of the day, when you're asking them to engage in this second conversation, you're inviting them to share something that otherwise would have felt uncomfortable and possibly threatening, but you're creating a space that is innately safe. And so they feel comfort in sharing, which allows them to tap into and move more fluidly between those different networks. Whereas, in a normal environment and in a work environment, that's not the case. So you are literally engineering an environment that allows their brain to feel safe enough to share their goals, passions, and dreams, which if we're thinking back to like the youth and encouraging them to be more creative, to dream bigger, not to just go to college and get the A and do what their parents wanted them to do because that's what they were always taught and that's what feels safe and that's how they'll feel accepted. We have to start from a young age to create and intentionally engineer these environments where they know and can rehearse their comfort in sharing their goals, passions, dreams, imaginations. That way, as they continue to grow up, it becomes their default rather than what we've trained in our kids now, which is be careful, don't do that, you're going to get hurt, all of these things that subconsciously prevent them from sharing their goals, passions, and dreams.
So much of what you said explains a lot of the phenomenon I'm noticing. A couple things. One, I don't announce how much time I give the same amount of time for each of these conversations when people engage in them. The first one's pretty easy to call people back. I can just mention a word, say, hey, time's up, or, and people can shut that conversation down pretty quickly. The second one about hopes, ambitions, and dreams, whoa, nobody wants to stop talking about it. And it's just like, I have to, and it's fun to watch, and I let it sort of be the way that it is, how challenging it is to bring people back, and often get comments to say, why did you make that one shorter than the first one? I'm like, it wasn't shorter at all. It was the exact same amount of time. So I found that really interesting. My experience is this, that given a chance, we can't wait to talk about those things.
Yes.
And I'll speak to it a little bit later about the utility when we do. The other thing that you explained, and I see this all the time, is the vacillation between the two. So
Mhm.
what I'll encourage people to do is to say, okay, here's, have this conversation about hopes, ambitions, and dreams. When the conversation wanders back into the past, just notice that it did and kick it back into the future. And it always does. And so there's a couple things that I'm sort of connecting the dots on, and I'm curious about your point of view on one of the phenomena. And maybe it's in the realm of psychology, but one thing is that I'm wondering if people need to feel like they can justify their claims for the future based on what they've accomplished in the past.
Mhm.
That there's some sort of, I need to justify my authority to make these claims,
Mhm.
is one of them. The other thing that I see is a hesitancy to share their dreams in a raw form in the absence of knowing how to get to them. Like there's almost like a background assumption that, oh, I can't say anything that I don't know how to do. I'm like, if you already knew how to do it, it's actually probably not a dream. It's like extrapolating the past forward. And I see, in the work that I do, it's about helping organizations create bold visions for their future, which is a giant leap. And the way I describe it is, let's take all the leashes off the dream. We'll figure out how to do it later. But don't withhold your dream because you don't know how to do it. State what you want to state as it relates to that conversation. So that sort of vacillation between the two happens a lot, and I see multiple phenomenon that may be contributing. One, I need to justify myself in these claims. The other is I'm withholding something because I'm afraid to say it because I don't know how to do it. Maybe going on. What's your take on that?
Yeah. There's so much there. I think a big part of trying to justify, like, oh, I've taken these steps, therefore I'm worthy of these next steps, and I promise you I'm capable of doing it. Sometimes I feel like it's not so much of trying to convince the other as much as it is trying to convince ourselves in the moment and get that external validation from the person that we are trying to convince. And so there's our brain is constantly trying to keep us in line with the identity that we have created for ourselves, because when we walk in alignment with that identity, our brain and our nervous system feel safe. And so when we are trying to say, hey, look, I've done this in the past, this is actually who I am, it's just going to look a little bit different now, it's a little bit more of a stretch, but it's the natural next step. A lot of this is also trying to convince ourselves, like, yeah, I am capable of this. I've done X, Y, and Z in the past. I'm capable of, the next step in the future. This aligns with my identity. So a lot of it very much is trying to convince ourselves, yeah, this is the next step. This is my identity. Because if a dream, which, by definition, a dream, an ambition, a goal that lives in the future, it's uncertain. It actually doesn't exist yet. And so when we express that vision out loud, we are creating the possibility that it might not actually match the prediction of our current identity or of who we want to create for ourselves. And the brain interprets that mismatch as a threat, and then we're less likely to move forward and to actually walk in alignment with that. So a lot of it is simultaneously trying to convince ourselves, to convince our own brain, yep, this is me, I'm capable, I've done this in the past, it's not that much more of a stretch. But then also, as we're convincing ourselves, we're trying to convince the person in front of us to also get that external validation of, yeah, go for it, you're totally capable, like, we see you doing that, etc. So at the end of the day, for me, it all comes back to trying to align your identity, because and to keep yourself safe, because your identity is the model that your brain is constantly trying to protect. So this is what I'm good at, this is where I belong, this is what people expect from me. And when we imagine a future that doesn't yet exist, we are doing our best to frame it in the context of what we've already done in the past to make sure that it checks those boxes.
So I heard this on I can't remember if it's the Huberman podcast, but one of the ones I geek out on, and there was a guest on there, doing some cutting edge research with fMRI technology, and what they found was when and I mean I have the language right, so correct me here, but when we're thinking about our current self and sense of identity and our past, our brain connects it to our identity.
Mhm.
When we're thinking about our future selves, our brain sees it as a stranger.
Yes,
So what the
exactly.
hell is that about? And like, what's your take on why that
Yeah.
is?
So when we think of ourselves in the current moment, our brain's like, yeah, that is us. We have done that. We have experienced that. We are living that. We are in the moment. We are safe. This is okay. This is not a threat. But when we think about ourselves in the context of the future, which doesn't yet exist, therefore is uncertain, therefore have potential threats that could kill us, yeah, that's scary. So we're going to avoid that because it is uncertain. We don't know it. We haven't experienced it. We don't have past data on it. So obviously, AI, machine learning, large language models, those are all the future right now. And at the end of the day, what they are doing is predicting the future based on a compilation of possibility from the past, from past data. We're getting all of this data from the past and we're saying, okay, we've run all of these trends, all of these algorithms. We understand that every time X, Y, and Z happen together, this is the most likely outcome. And our brain is doing the same exact thing. In the past, if we've experienced ourselves in a certain situation, having a certain conversation, giving a keynote speech, or doing something that might seem scary to somebody else, we're okay with it because we've done it. We've gotten through it. We have that data. We have the proof. Our brain has the proof that this is safe. But as soon as we go into the future, it's uncertain and our brain doesn't know, even if just a slight little bit of it is different. So let's say that we constantly give a performance on the same stage at the same time on every weekday night. That's comfortable. We've experienced it. We know what to expect. But as soon as we go to give a performance on a different day, on a different stage, where the lighting is different and it's a different time of day, that's uncertain to the brain. We have a little piece of information that is the same. We are performing, but all the other variables are different. And so, yeah, even though we've given the same performance a million times, the brain still sees that as a little bit of uncertainty, and different areas of our brain are going to light up. And it's the same when it comes to seeing ourselves in the past versus the future. We are the same, but the entire context is different, and we cannot predict every single thing that might happen. I mean, the all we can predict is probability, just like quantum. It talks about the probability of things, but we cannot exactly predict an outcome. Our brain is the same way. This
Mm,
probably will happen, but we're not exactly sure. So let's protect them from it by firing all of our alert and alarm systems in the brain to try to keep them from doing that because we don't actually know.
wow. Okay. Um, Here's something else I've noticed, and then I want to explore some territory with you. I noticed that the language changes. So the best way I could the best language I have for it is this. When we speak from where we go automatically, right? The knowledge center, our familiar.
Mhm.
It's descriptive language by its nature. I'm describing what had happened or is
Mhm.
happening right now. When we move into what has never happened and doesn't yet exist, it takes the form of more declarative language.
Mhm.
So I can assert my past, but I can't assert my future. I can declare it. Declaring a possibility that I'd love to see become true. And I even find the way we ask the question, that language really, really matters there. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But just on that note of like the language changes, because we can't be describing what it is that has never existed. We don't have the data to support it, or we just extrapolate familiar descriptions
Mhm.
forward. But we certainly can declare the
Mhm.
possibility of something.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. But I think to your point, it just comes down to what data do we have to validate the possibility, the probability of something happening. So in the past, it's happened. We can describe it word for word. We're very confident in it because we've already experienced it. But when it comes to the future, again, which is uncertain, we're not as confident describing it. And actually, I think this is a huge gap that manifestation closes the gap on. When we can get very specific on describing, not declaring the future, or both describing and declaring the future. This is what I imagine. This is what is possible. And I see it in this descriptive fashion. I think that's where the power stands when it comes to manifestation, is actually combining those two things, being able to declare what you want, what your vision is, and also to describe, okay, these are some of the paths I can take to get there. This is what it's going to look like. These are the feelings I want to feel, etc. I think that's where the real magic of manifestation is. And I know a lot of people think manifestation is woo-woo and mystical and magical and crazy and pseudoscience, but there's so much behind manifestation. And I just think pop culture has really done a disservice to what it actually is. And now people just think it's nonsense, but it really is such a powerful tool. And when we're talking about goals, ambitions, futures, dreaming out loud, dreaming big, shooting for the stars, manifestation is one of the most powerful tools you can use to get it. I mean, I manifested my entire business by accident without me even knowing it. I just imagined, what do I want to do? What do I want it to feel like? How do I want to impact people? And what is the possibility within that? And where am I going to live? Like, who is going to be with me while I'm on this journey? It's such a powerful tool. And so to your point, it makes total sense that we declare naturally in the future, but describe naturally in the past. But I think the power is when we combine the two.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, that word manifesting, yes, we'll just say it's troublesome in what that word's been distorted to mean. In the work that I do, it's very, very real. And I'll shape it like this. We're always creating future, whether we like it or not. Every action is causing a ripple effect, and it depends on, and this is where choice comes in. There's the accidental future, which is going to be nothing more than the consequences of our reaction to the world around us. And it's typically Groundhog Day, right? The thing keeps repeating itself because we're reacting from the same place that we've always reacted from. And then there's the intentional future, which is another choice, which is the future we want. And the other way to be able to work toward the future we want is to know what the heck it is. And so the power in declaring a possibility that's beyond what we fully understand or know how to do, that story, it's unbelievable. It's, as a catalyst, its capacity to drive and elevate the human condition. I've never seen anything like it. And I'm talking using that same methodology to say, okay, we need a catalyst. If we want to transform a human system, a catalyst must be present. Now, a catalyst could be one that, shows up at our doorstep and shoves us around, or a catalyst could be a vision for the future to be drawn toward. And, organizations with, tens of employees to tens of thousands of employees over the course of my career, to watch those organizations transform, that the day they declare the dream for the future, they're living in it in 24 to 36 months. Because the presence of the creation of the story and the presence of that story becomes the focal point. Now, I want to go back to like the RAS. Is that story capable of programming our filter to see it? And when we know what we want, we start to see doorways to it all over the place. When we don't know what it is, we don't see any doorways. We just see the familiar.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. So when we declare something, we are essentially creating, the way I kind of think about it is like if you have like a massive cork board of all the places you want to travel in your life, and you put a pin up there, when you declare it, you're saying, yep, that is my thing, that is my North Star. And the description of what it looks like or how you get there can change over time. The colors can shift, the textures can shift, all of that. But when you're declaring something, you're creating the possibility of it for your reticular activating system, which then sees it as a potential opportunity and then starts to filter your entire reality around it. So let's just, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's just say there's a company and they want to hit 1 million for the first time in year 3. When they declare that is their vision, that is their goal, everybody buys into it. Everybody feels safe around it. They know they have the standard policies and procedures and mechanisms in place. They know that they've created a foundation. They know that their product has demand and helps people. They believe in the mission, all of that. Collectively, they're establishing a consciousness that is aligned with that declarative point, that declarative goal, whatever it is. And then every little member that is part of that mission starts to retrain the reticular activating system to see the opportunities and all of the doorways open in alignment with that goal. And so it is really powerful. And at the end of the day, that is the foundation of what manifestation is. It is creating a very clear ambition and objective for something that you want in life. It is signaling to your brain that this is safe, this is possible. We've set up everything needed in order to achieve this thing. So show me the opportunities that are aligned with it, rather than operating out of a mind of scarcity, of fear, of failure, but rather out of abundance and out of trust and surrender and alignment. And that is what manifestation is. So yeah, that declaring process is so incredibly powerful. But then to go back to the descriptive process, that is kind of what I imagine as the visualization through the entire journey. It's going to shift, it's going to change, because you're going to have to pivot and adjust. And some people will come and some people will go, and the company might change and the economics of it might change slightly. So that is, to me, the descriptive part of it that is constantly in flux and in flow. But at the end of the day, that declarative point remains and remains your North Star.
So I have a question, because it feels like I sometimes confront a paradox, and again, the languaging is really important. When, oftentimes articulation of future in a business context tends to be almost myopically descriptive around fixed objects, like a dollar amount or an accumulation of some sum or a size of, or, these kinds of, sort of throwing numbers out there for whatever reason. There's a mathematical concept understood as the adjacent possible, which is right next to you may be the possibility you seek, but if you're so myopically focused on this exact version of the story, you'll walk right by the thing you actually called into existence is sitting right next to you. So one of the things I do to encourage is to encourage a shift in the nature of the language in that declarative story of the future. So, for example, if someone says, "Okay, we want to be a $10 million company or something," what I'll suggest them to do is say, "Okay, great. What if you described it or languaged it like this? We would have enough resource to do what?" Right? We'd be able to invest in what? We'd have reserves that would allow for what? As a way to favor experience over things. Like, how do we want to feel in this future? How would we be experiencing each other? How would we experience the world around us? I find those narratives become much more powerful because they keep open the specific tangible ways those things may show up and keeps our eyes open. I'm curious about, like, am I onto something here? Because I see there's limitations in the easy answer to it, or just, this fixed inventory list versus no, like, declare a container that a lot of things can happen inside of, right? That may take different shape and form, but yet create the same experience.
Yeah, I think there's power in both. So I think there's power in being extremely specific, but there's even more power in, like you said, declaring a container opposed to a fixed point within that container. And the reason is because when we get so hyper fixated on one thing, so let's use your example of 10 million. When we get so hyper fixed on that 10 million and that is all we are focused on, we put on our blinders and we often miss all of the opportunities that are surrounding us that might actually help us surpass that 10 million because we're only focused on that 10. When we do this, we activate the amygdala, fear center, threat detector area of the brain. We shut down the prefrontal cortex for logic, reasoning, decision-making, planning, executive function. And so it's definitely a beautiful coordinated dance between having the confidence in yourself and declaring that point, if it is monetary, and saying, yeah, we are capable of this because of X, Y, and Z, but also then having the awareness and the flexibility to say, but it might not come in the figure of 10 million. It might come in a different way, but the value is still worth that 10 million. So to your point, basically what I'm saying is the language is important, because if you're only talking in literal dollar amounts, you could miss 10 million more in value, just not in that dollar amount, because value, obviously, as we know, doesn't just come in money and currency. It comes in experience, it comes in collaboration, it comes in networking, it comes in lessons learned, it comes in so many different forms. And so if we pigeonhole ourselves to only 10 million in a dollar, there's possibility we're missing out on so much, and we're actually activating the wrong areas of our brain that are keeping us from seeing the larger picture and the bigger opportunity. So yeah, I think there's power in both. And I think you're definitely onto something when you're talking about the language. It has to be important to them. It has to be something aligned, obviously, with their business goals, but constantly reminding and communicating that. But we also don't want to shut off our brain's own capacity to literally see every opportunity that is surrounding that declarative point that you have set.
Yeah. And I find it, in my work with certainly with organizations, but also with couples and families, just as important to have that picture
Oh yeah.
of, well, let me ask you, it's kind of like, what's the utility in bothering? Like, we just talked about, like, we don't go there by default, but when we do, some magical things happen. There's a there's a lot going on in this. Why bother? Why bother talking about our dreams? What's the utility in it from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's important. I think and it's important because a lot of the time we need that most people need that external validation to take any step towards their goals and their dreams. And one thing I say to people is that if you have imposter syndrome, that is a good thing. That means you are leveling up in life, you are stepping out of your comfort zone, and you are teaching yourself that you are capable of more than you thought you were. And there's a lot to the phrase fake it till you make it. When you embody who you assume this version of yourself would be when you're achieving this thing. So let's say you have this massive goal, ambition, dream, and you don't actually, in the heart of hearts, believe that you can get there. Just pretend. Literally fake it till you make it. Because when we start to embody, when we start to fake this thing, but we get up early in the morning and we go to the gym because that's what we think a successful person would do. And we change our diet to be mostly whole foods because that's what a committed, successful person would do. We are literally becoming that person. We are training our brain to recreate our own identity. And then before we know it, we are that person. I have done this so many times in my past where I'm like, I don't know who they think I am, but that is not me. But I'm just gonna go for it and pretend that they think I am who they think I am, and then I become it, and then I become confident in it, and then I become an expert in that space. And like people are asking for my input and all of this. And so why bother sharing our goals and our dreams? It gives us confidence to move forward because typically we're going to share it with somebody that we feel safe with. We're going to share it with somebody that we know will encourage us and or support us, hopefully. And then that supports our ability to go forward, which gives us more data in the past to fuel future goals and dreams and ambitions in the future.
So you talked about um, let me see if this holds. When we speak to and bring language to our hopes, ambitions, and dreams, it's a stranger. We can't relate
Mm-hmm.
to it directly. Like our brains literally are have a hard time relating that that's me, that's someone else that I don't know. But if we keep it safe, um, we can it becomes incredibly powerful because then we can begin to relate to it. And so the couple, I'm curious your take on how do we keep it safe? Here's some things I've learned. To keep it safe, to make it safe, it's not a stranger, it's a thing, it's not scary, it's an ambition. Is first keep it present. So one of the things that I teach is represencing vision all the time because it needs to be spoken back into existence again. It can be written in language too, but there's something really powerful about having it written in language and spoken into the room, like say at the start of a meeting. Let's remember what we're here for. We're trying to create this future state. Let's represence that language. Then it's almost like bringing it into the room as a character that's in the meeting with you. So presencing is one of the techniques. Ultimately, we're looking for embodiment, where that's so embedded in your thinking, it comes with you as you walk in the room. One of the techniques to make it even more pragmatic in that presencing is we'll make like a cardboard cutout with the language for the vision on it, and it will sit in the chair at the head of the table when decisions are being made. And everyone has to, if we're going to make a decision about what we're going to invest in, we need to justify how is that going to get us closer to this or not. And we use that as a way to promote radical discernment, right? Thoughtful interrogation of ideas, choose the vital few only that get you closer to the vision. And having symbols as reminders of that vision. So a lot of times we'll build like iconography inside of an organization. It's hanging on the walls as symbolic reminders of that story just to keep it on our minds. So I'm curious your take on any of that. And then also like what are the techniques you see that we can use if we're going to dream, how do we make it a friend and
Yes.
have it be our partner that we're making decisions through and becoming inspired by as opposed to scared of and hiding it in a closet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially what you're talking about is exposure therapy. That's basically what you just
Wow,
described,
okay.
which is incredibly, incredibly powerful. You are bringing this thing that feels distant, it feels at one point unachievable, and you're bringing it, in your words, into the present, and you're exposing yourself to it over and over and over again. So it becomes familiar. And familiar is something that the brain eventually will see as safe. Oh, we've seen that.
Oh,
We've
interesting. Okay.
experienced that. We know that that is not a direct threat. It's been around. We've talked about it. We've seen it. We've felt it. Other people have talked about it. So you're getting exposure from it at multiple angles. And so eventually your brain starts to associate it with safety because, hey, it's been around and we're still good. We're still moving forward. We're still safe. So that tool, essentially what you're doing in all those different areas is just exposing them to the thing that once felt unsafe, and you are making it safe by exposing them to it more often. Um, that's one way a lot of people get over like irrational fears, is exposing them to it. So there was like multiple studies, but if you're afraid of spiders or you're afraid of the dark, you literally expose yourself to spiders in the dark and you teach your brain, this is not something that I need to be afraid of. I am capable of managing this situation. And you're doing the same thing by exposing them to that goal, that ambition, over and over and over again. So if I were to recommend any tools or techniques, obviously one is exposure. Make your brain see that thing now as safe. And you can do that through affirmations. So verbally saying it to yourself. You can do it through visualization, through meditation. You can do it through any type of exposure to it. really. You can think about it while you're going for walks. You can have it on your mirror in the morning, or whatever, exposure for the larger company is. But at the end of the day, we are exposing our brain to it under multiple different conditions and multiple different scenarios. And we're telling our brain, you're good, nothing to fear here. Let's move forward with it.
Interesting. I have again, the languaging of it and our intentions behind it. One of the things I see that it's the danger in the question that I think creates the fear even more, that creates a paradox where we don't really want to talk about our hopes, ambitions, and dreams in a corporate setting, is I think one of the worst and most dangerous and most weaponized questions that happens inside of offices. Where do you want to be in 5 years?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Right? Even asking, you're like immediately like, ugh. And the reason I believe we've weaponized it is because it's asked as if it were a test, and there's a right way to answer it. And even the idea of, how are you supposed to know that? It's unknowable, right? And so it's fraught with all of this stuff that has it be that, we're then stuck trying to be like, oh, well, what's an appropriate? We go right back into the, that place where our brain's like, unsafe, unsafe, unsafe. What do I do? What do I say that's appropriate? I mean, this is like scary territory. So one of the things I found benefit in is shifting the question. So for example, a version of that question I would ask, especially in a group setting, would be, what would be true in the future to say it was successful? Take off the, where do you want to be? What would be true? And put it all out there. Like, what are all the attributes that would be true to say the future was successful? I find that question frees people to let their minds wander freely into their imaginations, as opposed to going into their scary centers and going, oh man, what's the right thing to say right now? And what I find often, and I'll encourage people, I'll say, don't worry about the words. Open your mouth, the words will find you. Like, it's precognitive, presentient when we speak from that place. And almost every time, that's where the deepest when it comes to forming a vision that's going to compel people to drive toward it, it's often when someone's sort of wandering through the language to try to articulate what they're trying to say. Those are often the elements that are the most powerful. When we don't know what we're saying, we're speaking anyway. So what's that about?
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. So back to the part of feeling interrogated, we've all heard that question, where do you want to be in 5 years? And we assume that people know what the correct answer is.
There it is. Yeah.
And am I going to give the answer that they think is correct? Because if I don't, then that's social rejection. My anterior cingulate cortex, part of the brain, is going to fire. It's going to flag, oh, this is social rejection, social rejection. And then I'm going to feel unsafe. So let's get into the anterior cingulate cortex a little bit, because it plays in here pretty nicely. So the ACC is like our social alarm system. And throughout all of evolution, it played a really important part in helping us to evolve and stay safe. It's involved in emotional weight of social experiences. It increases activity during rejection. And it helps us to flag what is important. So it tells the brain, do they like me? Was that the correct answer? Is that what they were expecting? And if not, where do I need to go to be safe? And so you're flagging those systems in your brain when you ask a question like that. And like you said, language is so important because we are extremely complex human beings. Words carry weight, they carry association, they carry context, they carry, cultural information as well. And so a question like, where you want to be in 5 years comes with way more emotional weight than just those few words. But when we shift it into something like more personal, something that very obviously does not have a correct answer because it very much depends on your individual context, and we say, what would be true in order for this to be successful, we are giving the power back to the person to
Ah,
imagine, to say, well, for me, this is what would be true. For me, this is what success might look like. For me, this is how it would feel. This is the people I would impact. This is the state that I would help shift. So you're giving the power back rather than putting them on the interrogation board. So that's kind of my take on it. You're creating a completely different environment that encourages imagination, internal reflection, and encourages the brain to get creative rather than to search for the correct answer in fear of being socially rejected because we assume that there's a correct answer.
so like freed, like how do we ask questions that are sort of freed from the specifics that would have us think there's a right and wrong way to answer it?
Exactly. Or, yeah, asking questions that do not have previous context or a previous association with it. When we open it up into the realm of creativity and actually, like, I've never thought about this before, and what is true if that is successful, it just encourages so much more exploration, helps us get into that playful kid-like state, um,
Yeah.
opposed to just feeling like we're on trial and we freeze up and we activate the amygdala and we can't access any of our creativity because we feel threatened.
Mm. You know, one of the signposts that I look for when I feel like safety's been achieved, where people are, it's not only how verbose they are and excited they are to share things, but the language becomes much more emotionally tuned. And you'll notice like an increase in kinesthetic response, body
Mhm.
movement. You'll see more animation. Like it almost like it's drawing, like the inputs we're getting are coming from different parts of us, like our intuition, our heart, different places. So that like the physicality gets more involved when we're open and safe in that conversation about imagining the future. Is that something that I'm imagining, or is that?
No, and it makes total sense because when we are in a state of stress or a state of fear or a state of threat, we want to minimize the energy that we are expending because we want to consolidate all of our resources in case we have to fight or flee. So, in the point of the first question, where you see yourself in 5 years, for a lot of people, that triggers like it feels like a test. There's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And what if I answer wrong? And you go into this fight or flight situation. A lot of people do. I know I do when somebody asks me that question because I'm like, I have no idea. And now they're going to think I don't have a plan for the future. And does she actually know what she's doing? And I assume they're going to think all of these things, right? And so I start to get afraid of social rejection. My body freezes and I'm conserving all of my energy because I'm triggering those parts of the brain that are associated with survival. But when we create an environment that is safe, when we create an environment where the nervous system can feel calm, grounded, and regulated, it feels safe to move around. It feels safe to express emotion in different ways other than just verbally, whether that's through movement, whether that's through leaning in to listen to somebody a little bit closer. The body feels safe to get bigger and to expand and to be put in positions that otherwise might have been a little bit more vulnerable. And so it all connects. And it all comes down to, does the brain and nervous system feel safe? If yes, you will see a lot more free flowing, fluid movement. If no, you're going to be a lot more rigid. You're going to conserve energy. You might get a little bit smaller in case you have to fight or flee that threat.
Hmm, wow. Well, I know we could go on and on, but um, what are you walking away with from our conversation today? What's sort of landing with you or sort of sticking in your craw as we explore these things together?
I think one thing I've continuously learned from you for all of our conversations really is the power of choosing intentional language. Because I obviously come from the science background. I have a large background in health sciences and neuroscience. And the language in science is very direct. It's very strict. It's not taking into account the human experience. It's not taking into account context or cultural experience. And so sometimes I struggle with my language because it's very strict. It's very scientific. It's very like direct because that's how science is. But the more conversations I have with you, I'm realizing no, your individual words carry weight, they carry power, they carry energy because we are not a science experiment. As much as I love to study the brain and the human body, it is all based on probability. It's all based on prediction. It's all based on a consolidation of data, but we can't actually predict what's actually going to happen because we are so emotionally complex. And the power of words to influence somebody and to get a point across, even if you're trying to make the same point, shifting one or two or three words can be the real difference. And so that is a big thing that I'm learning from you that I think is so extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think it's for me what you're really planting is just the beautiful, and thank goodness, right? Thank goodness we have all these things working on our behalf to keep us safe, right? Because we wouldn't be having this conversation if that muscle wasn't built. We would have gone long ago by some saber-toothed tiger or whatever it was. Um, and at the same time, there's so much about I'm taking away about how do we make friends with the future so that it's safe to be talking about it and thinking about it, to take it out of, a place of fear and uncertainty that we tend to suppress it to through many ways. How can we have it become a friend that's a companion on our journey?
Mhm.
Going back to the utility, I think we both resonate with, which is it's worth it to take the time to speak to your dreams so that you can have it turn out. In the absence of it, it's probably pretty challenging to, have anything turn out but the accidental future of what's going to happen by default.
Absolutely. Because you have to create the possibility of something in your brain before you're ever going to take your first step towards it. And so the more we talk about it, the more we express it, the more we see it, the more we expose ourselves to it, the more it's going to become aligned with our identity. Therefore, the more we are going to rewire and train our brain to act and to see opportunities in alignment with that future goal and objective. And if we don't start by doing that, we are significantly limiting our ability to ever achieve it. And that's actually one of the biggest regrets that people have on their deathbed is not what they've done, but what they haven't done, what they didn't try to do, what they didn't take risks towards. Most people don't regret making a mistake. They regret not trying enough things that led to more mistakes.
And oftentimes it may be the first time they've ever shared it in words. That there was
Yes.
a thing they aspired to that never happened, and it may be at that end of life is the first time they ever put it out loud.
Which is one of my biggest fears in life is being on my deathbed and someone for the first time ever hearing a dream of mine. Like that is one of my biggest fears because I've experienced that with people in my family. And it's it's really sad. It's really sad. So I am actually my fiance and I are expecting a little girl in October. Yes. Thank you. I know this is kind of like off topic, but that is like
Kind
one
of
of
a
the
big topic. It's awesome.
yeah,
Oh, I'm blown away. So
yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. We're really excited. But what I was going to say, my reason for saying that is like that is one of my biggest passions to make sure she feels comfortable and safe is expressing anything and everything that comes to her mind, no matter how big it is, because the younger we can train it in our little ones, it's going to have this tidal wave effect on the entire state of consciousness of all human beings. And this is something I've seen that my brother has done really well with his little ones is not shutting off their creativity, not ever telling them they're imagining too big, and constantly creating a space of safety and helping them to form and create language around their own goals, objectives, and dreams. And I just think it's something that we've unfortunately stifled in ourselves and in the youth. So that is something as a new mom that I am like extremely passionate about. And you are helping me create the language and the intention behind it. So thank you.
Wow. Wow. Well, as always, I can't wait for the next question we're going to entertain together. Just a quick message to anyone that's watching this or hearing it in any way. We'd love your thoughts. Like, go to town on the comments. Like, what are you noticing? Are we crazy? Like, what's whatever it is, just or thoughts on other things that we may want to entertain that's got your curiosity. Each episode, one question, and we'll spend time unpacking it. So, pleasure as always, Jules, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I love this conversation. Thank you for your time.